Hi everyone, it's Dr. Nye, and today we're covering the urinary tract. So the urinary tract consists of 6 major organs, those being 2 kidneys, 2 ureters, the storage vat, so to speak, the urinary bladder, as well as the urethra. Okay, so if we look into our cadaver, if we look into Jenny, you can easily visualize the 2 kidneys. Now please note that these kidneys would not be readily observable upon opening the abdominal cavity of a cadaver. We had to reveal the kidneys because typically, they are located in a retroperitoneal position. That means behind the parietal peritoneum. So we had to remove the fascia, and then you can actually observe the kidneys. In fact, all of the organs of the urinary tract are retroperitoneal. That includes the 2 kidneys, okay, as well as the ureters. Okay, so you can see the, again, the ureters extending down from each kidney, and then those ureters would attach both to the right and left lateral inferior aspect of the urinary bladder. So we can't get a good look at the urinary bladder in Jenny, but what we'll do is we'll walk over and look at the urinary bladder in Charles in a moment. But I just want to point out the vasculature. So attached to each of the kidneys at this medial aspect, at the region of the hilum here, we have a renal vein and we have a renal artery as well. So there's a renal vein and a renal artery. The renal vein obviously brings blood back to the IVC, inferior vena cava, and the renal arteries are attached to the abdominal aorta. Okay, so let's walk over and we will simply point out the urinary bladder in Charles. So you can see it is quite a mammoth structure. And simply because prior to Charles' death, he did not void his bladder. So if you pass on and your urinary bladder has been distended, okay, so basically it distends in the superior portion, like distends upwards, so to speak, then when you pass on, that's essentially the size the urinary bladder will be, okay, when you investigate that structure within the cadaver, okay? So we will now walk over to the isolated specimens. We're going to look at the isolated kidneys and some bladders, and we will point out some important features. So if you notice, the kidneys are encapsulated, okay? So this is basically a fibrous capsule, okay? And once again, I want to point out that this would be the renal artery, okay? And again, we have a renal vein that is lopped off here. This would be the ureter. And in this case, we have a female bladder, okay? And you can recognize that this individual happened to void before they passed on. And that simply shows you that the overall dimensions of this urinary bladder are far more thick. So this is the detrusor muscle of the urinary bladder. And once again, when the bladder is distended, okay, and more or less fluid filled, right, then that detrusor muscle will expand from being, let's say, at least, or the lining of the bladder will expand to being, let's say, 5 to 6 layers thick of transitional epithelium, all the way to only about 2 or 3 layers thick, okay? But overall, the detrusor muscle, which makes up the walls of the of the urinary bladder consists of 3 layers of smooth muscle. Okay, so again, you can see a female urinary bladder, okay, and this would be the female urethra, which is only 2 to 3 centimeters in length. And this is a male bladder, and here's the prostate. And so you would have a prostatic urethra traveling through the prostate gland, a membranous urethra, which goes through the urogenital diaphragm, and then you have the penile urethra, which would run through the length of the penis. So the length of the urethra in a male is like on the order of, perhaps 9 to 10 centimeters versus 2 to 3 in the female. Now, if we look at a cross section of the kidneys, you'll see that that this more or less this granular type region that is, I would describe it as being like on the outer aspect of the kidney here. That is the kidney cortex. So outermost portion is the cortex. And the inner area here, this would be the renal medulla. And in the renal medulla, we have renal pyramids, okay? And again, there are renal columns, which are extensions of the renal cortex, which go in between the renal pyramids. Now, it's hard to see these structures inside of an actual human kidney. It's more easily visualized on paper, and I'll show you that in a moment. But basically, at the tip of each of these renal pyramids, okay, there would be a little cup-like structure called again, a renal papilla, okay? And I guess that would be the tip of your renal pyramid, would be this renal papilla. And this cup-like structure collects urine, okay? That would drain into a minor calyx, and you have 2 or 3 minor calyces draining into a major calyx. And then you would have 2 or 3 major calyces converging on what we call the renal pelvis. And then that urine would be conveyed out and down the ureter. Okay, so if we step over here and we look at our textbook, you can easily see that these would be the renal cortices. Okay, so this is the renal cortex. Again, the extensions downward towards this renal sinus, this space here, these would be the renal columns. Okay, and again, the renal medulla, this inner region, has these renal pyramids. So you might have 9 to 10 of these renal pyramids in the renal medulla. Okay, and again, to talk about these, the calyx, okay, a minor calyx and a major calyx, they would be the structures that will collect urine at the tip of these. The renal papilla. So this is the base of the pyramid. The tip of the pyramid is your renal papilla, and once again, the urine would drain into a minor calyx, which would collectively enter into major calyces, and then finally into the renal pelvis. If we look over here in this textbook, just so I can show you these structures, okay? So once again, this would be a minor calyx. So you have several minor calyces. They're each collecting urine from the tip of these pyramids, the renal papilla, okay? And again, the minor calyces collect into a major calyx, and these minor calyces are collecting into another major calyx. These are minor calyces collecting into yet a third major calyx. And these major calyces, the urine flows into the renal pelvis and then down and out the ureter. Okay, so basically the urine will be milked via peristalsis down the ureters, okay, where it'll eventually be stored inside the urinary bladder. All right, everybody, so that covers the major structures. and we will go over this as well in our laboratory discussion. Thank you.